What's going on, Los Angeles Bruin Nation? Welcome to another episode of the Bruin Bites. The Madman here, excited to get into all things UCLA football as well as basketball. But before we begin, I just wanted to take some time to offer my best wishes, my hearts, my prayers to all of the individuals that have been suffering catastrophic losses with these unfortunate Los Angeles fires over the last week in the greater Los Angeles area. Obviously, the Pacific Palisades, Malibu has been affected, Pasadena, Altadena. We're now sort of heading into the San Fernando Valley and so forth. And so just my hearts and prayers go out to everyone. We took a few days off from this show in honor of that and wanted to be respectful and appropriate of folks having to sort of deal with those situations. And even I myself, as someone with a family that lives close to the UCLA campus, have been sort of monitoring things very, very closely and wondering if and when we have to evacuate. So I wanted to just start there, that obviously whether we're Bruins or Rams fans or Chargers fans or Lakers fans or Clippers fans or dare I even say USC Trojan fans, we're LA and native Angelinos first and foremost. So we wanted to pause as a network to just sort of offer that to all of our listeners and our viewers, and just my best wishes to everyone here. And with that, hopefully this episode can serve as a bit of an escape, a bit of levity, and a bit of entertainment in a time that's been very, very difficult for the Los Angeles community. And so with that, we'll dive in here, folks, and we'll start on the gridiron. Obviously, some really notable news with UCLA football over the past 7 or 8 days since we had our last recording. The first and foremost is a new commit from the transfer portal, Tykeist Crawford, 6'5", 324 pounds, played the last 4 years again at the University of Arkansas, which has kind of been serving as a nice pipeline for the Bruins. Over the course of those 4 years, had 6 starts over the previous 3 seasons. He comes to UCLA with another year of eligibility, a nice rotational piece within the overall Arkansas offensive line in a very physical and talented Southeastern Conference, as we all know, and being able to slot Crawford in and fight for depth and rotational pieces within that offensive line, I think, is critical. And in addition to Crawford, UCLA was also able to get Katie Arnold, 6'7", 315 pounds from Jacksonville State, played a lot of meaningful snaps for Jacksonville State over the first half of the season up until the middle of October, and then for whatever reason kind of fell out of favor with that rotation. But with that size and that body, the opportunity now to bring in Crawford, bring in Arnold into this rotation that has already seen some significant gets of the likes of Armella and Ford and so forth, now allows UCLA to be able to bring in a really favorable offensive line going into Big Ten play. When you throw in the Youns of the world, the DiGiorgios of the world, now you're looking at a UCLA unit here with the offensive line that's 7 or 8 deep from an experience perspective. And now when you add the incoming freshmen and sophomores that haven't had a lot of experience, this is starting to look like a very credible Big Ten offensive line. So kudos to DeShaun Foster. This is the 5th offensive line get from the transfer portal, and really this roster looks like it's set up for success on the offensive side of the trenches. And then the last get, we were looking for it. One of the gap areas that we were looking to address at running back, Anthony Woods, 5'10", 180 pounds, comes to UCLA from the University of Utah and the prior 2 years from the University of Idaho. Woods obviously didn't get an opportunity to play due to injury and have a snap with Utah over the course of the 2024 season, but 2 very, very strong seasons with the University of Idaho in 22 and 23 to the tune of over 2,000 yards rushing, over 5 yards per carry, 27 total touchdowns. Most notably in that 2023 season, he had 1,131 yards and 16 rushing touchdowns on a 5.5 yards per clip. And the fact is that if somebody like Woods caught the eye of Kyle Whittingham and that power running game that Utah has been able to run very successfully over the last 6, 7, 8 years, that zone running scheme and that power that Utah loves to run, if it caught the eye of Whittingham, you know there's something to really like about Anthony Woods. He comes back home, a former decorated athlete at Palmdale High School, and now when you bring in Anthony Woods with presumably Berger coming back, you got Carson Cox as a decorated recruit, and then Cameron Jones is sitting there ready to break out in this 2025 season. You've got 4 guys now at the running back position to really push each other and really fight for that RB1 and RB2 slot. So another terrific get for UCLA. I think now moving forward, probably want one more linebacker to go after and one more defensive line rotational piece. And if they can do that and be aggressive in that particular way, this roster is shaping up very, very nicely for the 25 season. And again, this is now a transfer portal class that's sitting at number 7 in the country after all the dust has settled. And you have to give Coach DeShaun Foster and his staff a ton of credit for all the success that the program has had over the last few weeks. And I think for fans, we have to sort of look at the silence in a lot of ways. You know, UCLA football hasn't been making as much noise on a day-to-day basis as perhaps some other programs over the course of the offseason and this transfer portal period and just overall the nature of recruiting today. And I think we have to look at that as a positive. Look at the number of programs that are seeing mass exodus of talent and then a mad influx of talent. And just the volatility that we're seeing across the country is absolutely significant. And you look at UCLA, it really feels like it's a model of stability right now. When you look at the fact that you had the exits at the very beginning of the transfer portal window, Loya, Sturdivant, TJ Harden exited. But since then, there have been no exits from the program, only inputs back into the system. And I think that's absolutely significant and really speaks to a culture and identity and programmatic values that DeShaun Foster and his staff are building. And it's something that we as Bruin Nation should be extremely proud of. When you think about the landscape of college football at a macro perspective, to have any sense of opportunity for culture in today's day and age of college football, when the sport has become so transactional with infinite number of transfer portal entries, NIL playing such a huge role, playing time, all of these things, the individualistic and the business and the transactional nature of the sport have made it such that building culture in football programs is so difficult, if not darn near impossible. But if you look back at the last 4 national champions in this NIL era, what do we see? We see Georgia in 2021 and 2022 winning 2 national championships. We see Michigan winning the national championship last year, and presumably we'll see Ohio State winning a national championship this year. What do those programs all have in common? Kirby Smart of Georgia was a Georgia alum. John Harbaugh, when he won the national championship in Michigan, was a Michigan man. And now when you look at Ryan Day of Ohio State, while he didn't directly go to Ohio State, he was blessed by Urban Meyer, a native son of Ohio. So really the key is to go back to coaches that either are alums of the university or are from that region to begin with, and really look at these jobs as callings and not as stepping stones and not as something that they can sort of pad their resume with. And when you look at UCLA and you look at DeShaun Foster, who is an alum and who has said that if he is not the head coach of this program 20 years from now, he's done something wrong. And when you look at his associate head coach in Jerry Neuheisel, a UCLA legacy, someone who treats this as his calling, and you see the staff that they're building around, it's very, very clear that UCLA is really leaning into the idea of having alums and people that deeply care about the university and the Bruin values as the linchpin to this overall program, and then building talent with 3 stars, with 4 stars, with development being the name of the game. So again, Bruin fans, perhaps with DeShaun Foster's lack of head coaching and even coordinator experience in years past, the fact is this is a game plan that I believe is going to be a recipe for success for UCLA. We might take some pain like we did just this past year with 1 more rebuilding year, perhaps even 2. But this is the way that UCLA football gets back to its rightful place as a year-over-year conference contender in this new world, and I'm all for it, and they've done an absolutely tremendous job. I wish now, switching gears a bit, that we could have the same level of optimism about vision and direction and management and tactics and strategy with the basketball team that we do right now currently with the football team. And over the last 8 days, it has been a dark period for the Mick Cronin-led UCLA Bruins. 3 consecutive losses, 0-3 over the past 8 days. A very difficult 66-58 loss on the road to Nebraska, followed, of course, with the 94-75 defeat at Pauley Pavilion to Michigan, one of the worst home losses in UCLA basketball history in recent memory, and then followed up with a road trip to Maryland, 79-61 defeat at the hands of the Terrapins. So lots to get into here. But I think at a tactical perspective, we have to begin with the outside shooting. And this is a team that over the last 3 games, particularly from the three-point line, we've talked so much about this team's ability to shoot as being kind of the last piece of the puzzle, that perimeter shooting. And with the roster that they have, with the depth, the versatility, the toughness, this is, in my estimation, roster-wise, this is a Final Four quality roster if they can be consistent outside shooters. And just 12 for 66 from three-point land over the last three games, which is good for 18%. So obviously, you're not going to beat anybody. You're not going to beat 5 guys at the YMCA. You're not going to beat anybody at 24-hour fitness. You're not going to beat anybody at the park shooting 18% from 3, let alone a Division I Big Ten basketball. And when you sort of break that down, so often we've talked about, look, Bilodeau is really the offensive nucleus of this team. Daly and Johnson are those 2 stalwart wings, both offensively as well as defensively bring so much versatility to the team. Their ability to get to the rim, their ability to shoot from the outside, their ability to defend 1 through 5. It really comes down to your lead guards, because if Bilodeau plays to his averages and Daly and Johnson play to their averages, the recipe for this team is, can you get 2 lead guards in double figures? And if you can do that, you're going to be deeply successful. And we said, look, between Mack, between Andrews, between Clark, between Stefanovic, if any 2 of those guys can get into double figures, that is going to be the recipe for success. And if you look at what happened against Nebraska, only, Mack was in double figures. And then when you look at I should say only Stefanovic was in double figures. Then when you look at what happened in Michigan, only Mack was in double figures. And then when you look at what happened in Maryland, none of those guys were in double figures, and it was the freshman phenom Trent Perry that came through in double figures. So not enough consistency from a lead guard perspective there, and it's really exacerbated by Dylan Andrews. And we love Dylan Andrews so much for his veteran leadership. I think his presence in the locker room, his presence in practices, and just the overall trust that he's gotten from Mick Cronin has been absolutely significant. But over the last 5 games, as the competition has ramped up, obviously he had the huge shot against Oregon on the road. We followed that up with a great win against Arizona, tune-up game with Prairie View A&M. But then since that North Carolina game till now, these 5 games where the competition has really elevated consistently, Dylan Andrews is averaging 2.8 points per game on 6 out of 30 from the field. And so 2.8 points per game on 20% from the field is simply not going to be able to get it done. And at a tactical level, Mick is really going to have to look at making a lineup change here. And he's got a couple of different approaches. You can go with skill or you can go with size. And I think the size argument is to be able to say, okay, pull out DA and bring everybody else up a position. Have Sky Clark as your lead guard, and then pull in Kobe, Daly, Bilodeau, and then bring in Mara. I think Mara would be the obvious big man choice because he's still an offensive threat. He's got a really nice finesse game, jump hook off of either hand. He's going to be able to create that spacing. And now you can have a true kind of 1-2-2 offense where you got your lead guard in Clark at the top of the key. You got your 2 wings in Kobe and Daly, and then you got 2 guys on each side of the block in Bilodeau and Mara, and you can run all kinds of different action off of that. High pick and roll. You can, down screen. You can go high-low. There's a lot of different movement that you can have off of that. Now, there's an argument to be made that perhaps should Clark also be the lead guard? I think he should be with this new configuration. But look, you can even give Trent Perry a chance at lead guard and see what that looks like. But I think this sort of 1-2-2 approach is probably where you want to go. The alternative is to say, keep Billadau at the 5, have, Kobe Daly slide down at the 4, Kobe at the 3, and then who's going to be your 2? I think we've talked a lot about Mac as somebody who really thrives off the bench, as someone who's just going to kind of come in and attack and redefine sort of the energy of the game. And you don't want him coming in and having to deal with playmaking and having to deal with floor spacing. You want to let Mac be Mac and come off the bench. I think DA needs some time where he's going to have to kind of slide back in the rotation. And so that leaves you with either Stefanovic or you try Trent Perry at the 2. And I think there's arguments to be made on each side. Stefanovic, you just feel like if he's just a pure shooter with really good players around him, you just get the sense that I think his shooting is going to be taken to a different level. I just don't know if he's been put in the right positions. And so statistically and shooting percentage-wise, oftentimes it doesn't tell the story. I think there's an argument to be made for Stefanovic at the 2, and then you can try Perry at the 2 as well, but there could be some overlap with Sky Clark. So overall, I would be in favor of Stefanovic coming in to replace DA, or you go bigger with Mara at the 5, which I think is what the Bruins will ultimately have to do moving forward. So tactically, I think that's where Mick needs to go. But taking a step back strategically, a lot of conversation over the past few days with Mick Cronin's comments, particularly after the Michigan game, where he called the Bruins players and coaches soft. He called the players delusional. He said that they were nice kids, but they really had no idea what it took to win, to work hard, to be successful, essentially was the gist. And then he followed that up with getting ejected out of the Maryland game, where he said, look, I understand that UCLA is the new team on the block in the Big Ten, and insinuating that there were some biases in terms of officiating, and then saying he sort of purposefully egged the officials on to get him ultimately thrown out of this game. I've had a couple of days to sort of reflect on that. One is, I think leadership is all about elevating the people around you. And when you're in charge, it's all about getting people in the right positions to succeed and taking the accountability on yourself when things don't work. When you're the highest paid, when you're at the top of the organization, ultimately the buck stops with you. And I remember a great quote from Peyton Manning when he said, in the NFL, because the quarterback gets paid so much more than everybody else, and because the quarterback gets so much more attention than everybody else, when you win, it's we. And when you lose, it's me. And that's really the approach that needs to be taken. I was so disappointed in Mick's comments where he essentially blamed everybody but himself. He blamed his players. He blamed his assistant coaches. He blamed the referees. He blamed biases in terms of the conference. Everyone and everything was blamed except for himself. And ultimately, Mick is the one who got the NIL that he needed in this particular season. He's the one who built the roster in his image. He's the one who's in charge of offensive and defensive schematic strategy. This is all ultimately on Mick Cronin. And the fact that he took a shot to his players, you have to really wonder, where is this team psyche? And are they really going to play for him moving forward? And that's going to be the question that remains to be seen. As someone who's rather plugged in with the university, talked with a number of university insiders in the past few weeks and in the past few days, and there has always been a sense over the last few months and really from last season into this season, there's a question whether or not Mick Cronin really epitomizes Bruin values. Given his demonstrative nature on the court, given the way he sort of attacks players, his own players, just given the overall sort of intensity that he brings. It's the things that we sort of love about him. But there has been questions within the university about whether or not Mick Cronin aligns with Bruin values. And that's something that we're going to have to watch and monitor here moving forward. It's something that I think we've seen as almost a badge of honor in years past, where he's kind of the old school coach in a world where things have become so much more monetized and so much more professional oriented in terms of kind of NBA light, if you will, that Cronin has been sort of this breath of fresh air from sort of old school. But the combination of his lack of accountability for this team struggles, which, oh, by the way, this is a Final Four roster. Okay, so if you can't sort of get the best out of your players, what does that say about you as a head coach? The combination of that with the fact that he feels like, it's everybody but him. And also, has he sort of plateaued as a coach right now? Is Mick Cronin the coach that will take a subpar program and get them to play the right way and get them to be a Sweet 16 team? But is that his ceiling? Is he really the coach that is going to get you from the Sweet 16 to the Final Four and ultimately be a champion? What I see a team when it comes to kind of Mick Cronin basketball over the last few years is a team that looks very indecisive and very uncertain about what to do offensively. They look really tight and they look really nervous. They're so afraid to make a mistake that it causes hesitancy and it causes a lack of spacing and it causes a lack of identity from an offensive basketball perspective. And that is the reason that this team historically has lost so many leads over the years. When they've built up big leads, whether in the tournament, whether in the Pac-12 tournament, games against SC, big conference games, it's been that fear of not wanting to lose as opposed to going after it and trying to win it. So lots to monitor here with Mick. He really needs to take a hard look in the mirror, because if this season free falls, and this is going to be a second consecutive year, potentially, if the Bruins don't make the NCAA tournament, Martin Jarman's going to have to ask some really tough questions, because we could very well be watching the end of the line with Mick Cronin. I don't want to be overly dramatic about it. I know we touched on this a couple of days ago, a couple of episodes ago, and said, look, Mick is, a great coach and a great institution to this university as a head basketball coach. So if he's struggling, you got to take it with a pinch of salt. But the evidence right now is starting to swing in a different direction. It's going to be really fascinating to see how his players play for him moving forward towards the end of this season and what he can get out of this group of players. And whether it's this year or whether it's next year, I think that's ultimately going to be the litmus test if Mick Cronin is the long-term solution for UCLA, because something's got to change. He's either got to change his offensive approach and let guys be a little bit more free-flowing and allow for mistakes, or B, he has to sort of change his demeanor with how he interacts with his players or how he interacts with the officials, or C, he's going to have to figure out bringing in potentially some assistants that can complement him in a way that will speak to recruits moving forward and into the future. So lots to monitor there. But as always, anything that drops, we got you covered right here, Bruin Nation. Lots of love to everyone out in Los Angeles. And as always, fours up forever.